Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Sportscaster and her son, where sports bridges the gap between the generations. I would be that older generation. I'm Peggy Dionne, 12-time Emmy award-winning sportscaster from ESPN Chicago. I'm the OG, and this is my son, Jason. Hey, Jason.
Yeah, I'm Jason. I'm the younger generation, even though it might be a little hard to tell looking at us. But I'm the sportscaster out here in Manhattan, Kansas, Topeka, Kansas. I spend a little time in both. Covering K-State sports, also talking Texas basketball for the Field of 68, and doing this show with my mom where we talk about the lowly Chicago Bears.
Okay, you know what's crazy? The last episode, we had Herm Edwards from ESPN on.
The man.
And we were talking about the ascension of Caleb Williams and how every week there was new superlatives about Caleb Williams and how quickly he was rewriting the record books for quarterbacks in Chicago. You know what's happened since then, Jason?
They haven't scored a touchdown.
You're exactly right. He has not thrown a passing touchdown since the bye week. Yep. It has been a month since he has thrown a passing touchdown. The Bears are in a deep dive, a nosedive, 3 straight losses after their 3-game win streak against the bottom feeders in the NFL. And the Bears have fired their offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron. It's crazy how quickly things have changed.
Well, thank God the Bears are freed from Shane Waldron, because I think that watching the last few games, Arizona game and the New England game, like that New England defense is terrible. And the Bears made them look fantastic on Sunday because no one could get open. And so change is a good thing, and change happened Tuesday morning in Chicago. Great thing to wake up to. I mean, that usually they save something like that for a Friday news dump, not in the NFL, but, little Tuesday morning. Change is going to be made. Like, they're going to score a touch. They're going to have a passing touchdown this weekend. They have to. I just, there's not much else for me to say about these last couple of weeks other than it's the most Bears thing of all time.
I know.
It's the most Bears thing of all time. They have looked so bad these last 2 games, been borderline unwatchable. Yep. And then, firing a coach, you hope that's going to make the difference. But at this point, you have to ask, Caleb Williams doesn't look great. Wide receivers don't look great. For as much as DJ Moore complains on the sideline, he can't really get open. And so just frustration, pure frustration. And you hope that this change does something, but man, we're going to wait and see.
The last time the offense looked this bad at Soldier Field, there were quarterbacks like Caleb Haney and Chad Hutchinson and Jonathan Quinn. Not a number 1
Brady
overall pick. Jonathan Quinn. You don't even know who Jonathan Quinn is. Yeah.
No. Wow.
Yeah, I am telling you, this is not supposed to be happening with the first overall pick in the NFL draft. And the fear of regression with Caleb Williams is huge. And Matt Eberflus had to take accountability. He had to take responsibility, because ever since the Hail Mary loss in Washington, there were cracks in the surface that became very big, very, very big breaks in this team. They had to do something, and they need to get Caleb Williams back to playing how he played in the middle weeks of the first half of the season.
Yeah, getting his confidence back. Confidence is the most important trait for a quarterback, especially a young quarterback. And so just to get his confidence back, Mom, it feels like it's been an eternity since the Bears have scored on an opening drive, and I just feel like if they were to do that this Sunday against Green Bay, new offensive coordinator, Caleb hasn't thrown a touchdown since the bye week. If they have a clean drive, and I mean, this is really wishful thinking because it hasn't happened in a long time, but if they can execute a clean drive, get his confidence back, throw the ball in the end zone, 2 hands, touchdown, I think that'll go a really long way for Caleb Williams. But it's hard to even imagine that right now with just how anemic the offenses look. Everyone looks bad. The offensive line is terrible. Everybody always says, and I've always said as well, the most important thing to do when you invest in a young quarterback is to build an offensive line around him. And the Bears have not only failed at that, when they have attempted to build an offensive line around him, they've brought in the wrong pieces. Every player who they've added, even Darnell Wright, has not played anywhere near the caliber of a top 10 pick offensive lineman. And so it just makes you wonder how they have to go about this offseason.
Well, Ryan Poles was part of the Kansas City Chiefs front office when they brought in Patrick Mahomes, and they realized really quickly that they had an awful offensive line, and they made wholesale changes to help Patrick Mahomes. And he's going to have to do the same thing. 38 sacks given up this year, 18 since the bye week. So 18 sacks in the last 3 games, 9 last week against the Patriots, 6 the week before against the Cardinals. And these are teams that were not sacking quarterbacks. They're in trouble. They need to get back to being a team that's on the up and up. And they've played from behind in every single game this year, have yet to score a touchdown in the opening quarter on the offense.
Wow.
Jason, let's bring in someone who knows a little bit about how an NFL team actually develops a quarterback that's waiting. Rob Demovsky works for NFL Nation, ESPN. He's a local guy. He's actually from Chicago as well, and he covers the Packers. Rob, how are you? It's good to see you.
It's great to see you guys. I will say I've done a lot of these, but this is my first mother-son podcast appearance, so I'm definitely checking that one off the list.
Awesome. So one thing the Bears cannot check off the list is developing a quarterback. This has been an issue of their entire franchise history. And it's easy to point to Green Bay, where they've had Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and they have the luxury of sitting on the bench and learning from a Hall of Fame quarterback. Not every team can do that anymore, not these days. But take us back to how difficult that was for the Packers to do, especially when Aaron Rodgers was getting itchy, and then they bring in Jordan Love. You know, how does it actually work successfully?
So their general manager, Brian Gutekunst, who has been with the Packers since the Favre era, and studied under Ron Wolf, who was the one who traded for Brett Favre, Ted Thompson, the one who drafted Aaron Rodgers. And he said the easiest time to get a quarterback is when you don't need one, and the hardest time to find one is when you do. And while he took Peggy a ton of criticism when he drafted Jordan Love, because Aaron Rodgers was, still in the prime of his career, his job, the general manager's job, is to win today and win for the next 10, 15 years, whereas the head coach only cares about today, which from an organizational standpoint, it's probably why the Packers have been so successful, because they've always kept the general manager and the coach separate. They're not each other's bosses even. They both report to team president Mark Murphy, which that actually changed when they hired Gutekunst in 2018. But it's a way to ensure that you have someone looking out for the long-term interests of the franchise. And if you don't have a quarterback, you really don't have a future. So did they get lucky with Brett Favre to start this? Maybe. Ron Wolf was working for the Jets, and he wanted to draft him with the Jets, and the Falcons took him. And then the next year he gets the job in Green Bay and tells Bob Harlan, the president, I'm going to trade a number 1 first-round pick for a quarterback that was barely got on the field in Atlanta. And Bob Harlan said, if that's what you think is best, then do it. So they may have gotten lucky there, or maybe Wolf knew something. But then the plan was enacted with, Ron Wolf, even when he didn't need quarterbacks, he drafted Mark Brunell. He drafted Ty Detmer. He drafted Matt Hasselbeck. So he drafted quarterbacks and then traded them away. And the Packers continue to do that. They drafted Aaron Brooks. Traded him away, Matt Flynn. So they've always been in the business of trying to find quarterbacks. And I think that's the number one reason that this franchise has had 30 some years of sustained success.
It's one of the things I remember the most is Ron Wolf famously saying, you draft a quarterback every year if you can, because it's so hit or miss. And here the Bears have the number 1 pick 2 years in a row, and they have the opportunity. They pass on CJ Stroud. The next year, then they're able to get the guy that they wanted, a guy that, quite frankly, most teams said was the number 1 overall pick. But now you see how important how you develop them and how careful you have to be with them, making sure that they get some reps, making sure that they feel confident, and so that you don't break them by playing them too soon. I mean, it is such a delicate balance.
It is. And like very few guys that played right away and failed right away turned it around. Peyton Manning might be one of the exceptions. I mean, Peyton Manning led the league in interceptions his rookie year, and I think they won 3 games, managed to do it. And the thing about going back to Jordan Love, when they drafted him in 2020, obviously they didn't need him, but it also gave them a chance to evaluate him behind the scenes for a couple of years. And let's say they determined he wasn't the guy. They would have had another crack at finding the quarterback, right? Like, I mean, they got you would have wasted a first round pick if Love didn't turn out, but you would have at least, because you drafted one when you didn't need one, you had a chance to look at this guy for 2 or 3 years and see if you thought he had what it took. And if he didn't, then draft another one. Whereas the Bears have always had to play the guy they drafted right away. And it's really, really hard. I mean, Aaron Rodgers told me once that he thought it took him the full 3 years to learn the offense. Now, maybe offenses have changed and the technology to learn is different. But like it's almost impossible to expect any quarterback to come in and just, be a star. I mean, Patrick Mahomes didn't play till the last game of his rookie year. So it's really hard.
With Malik Willis, I'm really interested in how good he's looked in his limited action this year. What are is that more of a culture thing where, it's just next man up and he's got all these guys behind him and he's playing well, or is that, them identifying a guy who maybe was in a bad situation in Tennessee and had a lot of talent? He was great at Liberty his final year of college.
Right. So I can tell you this, Jason, the morning that they were going to start him for the first time against the Colts, I believe in week 2, the Packers coaching staff, they were not sure if he was going to be able to do it. I mean, they really did. I talked to a couple coaches on the field before the game and I asked them, what do you think? And they said, we have no idea, like whether he could do it. He had been there 18 days or whatever. And it was also his 4th offensive system since he came into the NFL, like 3 years in Tennessee with 3 different coordinators, and then comes here and has to learn a new system. I was looking the other day at Coach of the Year, like odds, and Matt LaFleur was nowhere on it. To me, the fact that they won basically 3 games, 2 starts plus the second half of the game that Malik Willis finished, the fact that he basically won 3 games with Malik Willis, I don't know how that doesn't at least get some attention for Coach of the Year. He played to his strengths, which was, very limited at first. Each time that Malik Willis played, they added more and more to it. And by the 3rd game, he audibled to a deep ball down the field to Christian Watson that no one ever thought he'd be able to do when he got here, in early September. So I really think that Matt LaFleur and the coaching staff deserve a lot of credit. I do think, though, to your point, Jason, about just needing a fresh start in Tennessee, from Tennessee, I think there's something to it. Malik Willis told us, and this goes back to Peggy, your point about playing right away. He had to start, I think it was 3 games his rookie year in Tennessee. I think it was Marcus Mariota opened that season as the starter, if I remember right. And he told us like a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, he's like, look, I had to start those games. I was not ready, which I thought was big of him to admit. But it goes back to what we're talking about with trying to play quarterbacks right away, like the Bears have done, over and over with these guys.
The other thing that's really interesting to me is like the Packers just don't draft wide receivers in the first round. It's very well known. They just don't, but they still strike gold. Like Jaden Reed, great find. Romeo Dobbs, he's been very good. Yeah. Christian Watson. Like these are great wide receivers, and they're not spending high draft picks on them. What's the mentality there? Why is that? Yeah.
Jason, how old were you in 2002?
I wasn't born yet for that draft. I was born in June of 2002.
They drafted Javon Walker in the first round, receiver, in 2002. That's the last time they've done it. You literally your entire lifetime, they have never drafted a receiver in the first round. So it's just that you mentioned, like, I mean, Donald Driver, who was probably top 5 receiver ever here, was a 7th round pick. Now that's just pure luck. That's not anything that, they had figured out. But Greg Jennings, James Jones, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams, on and on and on. And now, you mentioned the guys that are here now. Jaden Reed, 2nd round pick, and Dobbs 4th round, Christian Watson 2nd round. It's remarkable. I don't know how they do it, but they've done it. And there were there's fans that are frustrated. Aaron Rodgers was frustrated by it. I mean, he wanted them to take Justin Jefferson badly the year they took Jordan Love. I mean, now it turned out the Vikings traded up and they weren't going to get him anyway. But he thought that draft was deep on receivers, and Rodgers thought he was getting a receiver that year. He should have known better that he wasn't. But they've I believe this year when they drafted Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle out of Arizona. That's only the 2nd time in the last a lot of years that they drafted an offensive player. The other one was Jordan Love. Otherwise, it's been all defensive guys going back to, I want to say, I don't know, since the Rodgers pick, I think, in 05.
Wow.
So Rob, let's talk play callers, because upheaval here in Chicago as Matt Eberflus lets his 2nd offensive coordinator go within 2 years, after letting Luke Getsey go last year. What is the key with these young quarterbacks and the play caller? With Jordan Love, yes, he got this opportunity to sit and to watch. But what we're learning with these young guys is the success does typically come with the reps. So they're having success in their 5th and 6th seasons for a reason, because they finally get it. The experience is there. But when you're playing these young guys, which a lot of teams are doing this year with this bevy of quarterbacks, they're doing what they're comfortable doing. They're paring down the playbook, looking at what they did in college, and then applying that into their offensive system. What is it that the Packers do as well with Jordan Love to make him successful?
So that's a really interesting point, Peggy, because the last year when Jordan Love started the season, and Matt LaFleur and offensive coordinator Adam Senovich took the same approach, that exactly what you're saying, pared things down, and it really didn't go that well. I mean, if you remember, the Packers were 2-5. And then I think they were 3-6 at their bye, or maybe it was 2-5 whenever their bye was. And Matt LaFleur decided that I believe he kept saying that Jordan needed to cut it loose. Like, he was thinking too much. He needed to cut it loose. Well, LaFleur decided that, you know what, I need to cut it loose as a play caller too. Like, I've got to let him go. And I'm not saying that works for every quarterback, because some quarterbacks, might force things or whatever. But I remember specifically Matt LaFleur in the second half of last season when Jordan Love, the last 8 games, he threw 18 touchdowns, 1 interception, over 70% completion rate. It was remarkable. He said, look, I had to cut it loose as a play caller. And, I don't know that works for everyone, but it worked here. I will say this, my experience in the league, and maybe you've experienced this when you've seen change happen too. This is anecdotal. I don't have any statistical evidence of this, but it does seem like there's an instant boost when a coaching change. It doesn't always last long term. When the Packers fired Mike McCarthy with 4 games to go in the 2018 season, they won the next game. I remember covering a Packers team playing a terrible, terrible Chiefs team. It's hard to believe that the Chiefs were terrible, but they fired whoever the coach was. Like, they were 1-12 or something like that. They promoted Romeo Crennel late in the year. Packers were a good team. They went to Kansas City. Kansas City beat them. Like, there just seems to be, I don't know if it necessarily is applicable to the play caller, but when there's coaching changes, a couple of players always would say this to me. They'd say, you know what? It's on us. Like, we got this guy fired. Like, there's a pride thing with some players that when there's a coaching change made, they kick it into gear a little bit. And again, maybe it's not long lasting, but in the short term, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears came out and were pretty productive right away.
Well, perfect example is Thomas Brown. Thomas Brown last year was the Panthers offensive coordinator, nearly upset the Packers in week 16. He took over the play calling when Frank Reich was looking to make a change. And Thomas Brown, suddenly the Panthers started scoring again. Bryce Young didn't look so awful, but then they kind of dipped again. Frank Reich took it back. Frank Reich gets fired. Thomas Brown takes it over again, and they kind of dipped up again. So they did kind of have that ebb and a flow. Yeah. But Thomas Brown is a guy that does know the Packers very well and could very well provide that kind of boost for the Bears.
Yeah, the only difference is it's a new defensive coordinator in Green Bay this year. The players are very similar, a lot of the same guys, but Jeff Hafley's scheme, they hired Jeff Hafley, left the head coaching job at Boston College to come be the Packers defensive coordinator. You don't see that very often, although as a side note, you might start to see that with college coaches not really liking the portal and NIL deal. But this was a remade system. They went from a 3-4 to a 4-3. They went from being a team that never took the ball away last year to now they're, if not leading, they're right up there at the top of the takeaway thing. I do think, though, and I've said this about the Packers defense, and I've seen it in defenses before. Defenses that rely on takeaways don't always hold up in the end, because when you play good teams in the playoffs, those teams don't turn the ball over. The Mike Sherman years here, they are statistically, their takeaway totals were off the charts, and then they'd get into the playoffs and play good teams, and they couldn't get takeaways, and they'd get beat. So I am while I think that Jeff Hafley has done an incredible job here, their defense looks totally different than it did last year. I do wonder if that is, this isn't a problem for the Bears, but this is a sustained, successful plan if this team is going to make, a Super Bowl run. I just don't know, when you get into the playoffs and you're playing, these really, really good teams, if you can rely on takeaways.
These two teams are moving in such different directions, but the game's still going to be played on Sunday. It's been such a lopsided rivalry. I'm a believer in the train of thought that in a rivalry game, you throw everything out the window and you just play. It matters more, whatever. But the Packers have still won just about every time in recent memory. Why is that?
Yeah. Matt LaFleur, I believe, has not lost to the Bears. This is his 6th season. That would be 10 games. So, the Aaron Rodgers "I own you" thing is right, but I mean, maybe Matt LaFleur should be co-owner in that, because he's never lost to him. I will say this though, Jason, like, as much as we like the idea of a rivalry, I don't think the players today really care that much. I mean, we talked to Josh Jacobs earlier this week, and he played for the Raiders his first 5 years in the league. Came here this year as a free agent, and someone asked him, does the Bears-Packers rivalry mean anything to you? And I actually give him credit. He goes, "Look, I'm not going to BS you guys. It really, I understand the history of it, but it really doesn't. It doesn't mean anything to us because maybe they look at it as one-sided, but also guys just change teams so fast that." It's just your rivals. Who do you have to beat to win the division? And right now, that's the Lions. And I would say previously, the Lions and Packers, that was the lowest of the rivalries. It was always Bears, Packers, Vikings, Packers, and now, I mean, they better worry about the Lions, and they talk more about the Lions than they do the other teams in the division. That's just the game today. But from us in the media and fans, like. Yeah, you walk through the Soldier Field parking lot on Sunday, you're going to hear, a bunch of anti-Packer talk, and same thing up here. You get the Bears still suck chant going through the concourse at Lambeau. So from that standpoint, it's a great energy and great atmosphere, but I don't think the players see it that way anymore.
Last couple of questions for you, Rob, before we let you go. I don't know what the Packer fans and what players and coaches thought of the Bears heading into the season. I think there was a lot of hope that the Bears were actually on the way up. What's the reaction now with what's going on with the Bears? What's the reaction in Green Bay?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into it, everyone thought that team won. They won 7 games? They won 7 games last year, without a quarterback, which told you that they had a lot of pieces in place in other aspects. And I think that, people were, were, definitely thought they might be a dangerous team. And that's not to say they won't be. They're not out of it. They're 4-5. I mean, the Packers were 2-5, like I said, last year, and ended up making the playoffs. But I think I looked at this the other day. The Bears have scored, was it 27 points in their last 3 games combined? Yeah. That's not going to get it done. I think from a Packer fan standpoint, like Packers fans love to count how many quarterbacks have started for the Bears since 3 starters or 4 starters, going back to the beginning of the Favre era. I guess there's actually a couple more because of the 2 years Rodgers broke his collarbone. But basically, they've had 3 quarterbacks in the time that the Bears have had about 35.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Finally, before we let you go, are you surprised at all? Luke Getsey didn't work out in Chicago, didn't work out with the Raiders, and also Mike McCarthy with what's going on in Dallas.
Yeah, so with Luke, I think Luke's a good football coach. I don't know that he's an offensive coordinator. Like he was a really good quarterbacks coach. But a little bit the same thing with Nathaniel Hackett. Aaron Rodgers makes a lot of guys look good. And in fact, I remember Matt LaFleur, we were at the owners' meetings that offseason that they were working the trade out with the Jets, and everybody in the Packers organization couldn't wait to get rid of Aaron Rodgers. And LaFleur said, you know what? Aaron Rodgers made a lot of people a lot of money, or me included, he said. So, and then with Mike in Dallas, I mean, they've won 12 games, 3 years in a row? Like, you don't think the Jacksonville Jaguars, Tennessee Titans, some of the Arizona Cardinals, whoever would kill to have a 12-5 regular season. Unfortunately, Mike took a job in Dallas that, a lot like here, and it's probably why he got the job, because the Joneses thought, he was used to a place where the scrutiny was really high. And I know people are surprised that scrutiny is high in Green Bay because it's a small town. This is literally the only thing going in the state. So all eyes, outside of the Wisconsin Badgers are on this team. And there's a ton of media coverage and all that. So I do think from that standpoint, that's probably why Mike got the job. But I also think that, they didn't help Mike a lot in terms of player acquisition. I mean, they didn't sign any free agents. I thought he did a great job taking over the play calling last year with Dak, and the offense was incredible. Then it just didn't translate to the playoffs. So, unfortunately for Mike, that's probably going to be, it's probably going to be it for him. His contract is up, so technically they don't have to fire him. I think that's a hard place to win. And everyone thinks that Jerry Jones wants to win football games. You know what he wants to do more, Peggy? Make money.
Make money.
Make money.
They don't necessarily devote everything they have to winning football games.
Well, it's the opposite here in Chicago. All they want to do is win football games, and they just can't figure out how to do it. Rob, it's great to see you as always. I wish we had more excitement for Packer Week. Instead, it's another week of just craziness with what's going on with this team here in Chicago. But it's great to see you. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I learned this about the NFL. Just when you think you've seen everything, something else, there could be something crazy happens in the game Sunday that we've never seen before.
You're exactly right. Rob Demovsky from ESPN NFL Nation. Thank you, Rob.
All right, guys. We'll be seeing you.
All right, take care. Check out Rob Demovsky on ESPN, and also not just ESPN's NFL Nation covering the Packers, but also on social media at Rob Demovsky. Local guy, Jason, went to Arlington Heights, Rolling Meadows High School. And he's now covering the Packers for the last dozen or so years.
I think that's kind of the beautiful thing of sports journalism, right? Like, you can grow up somewhere and then a job will take you to the rival team and it just becomes home. So I love that. Super cool getting to talk to Rob. Great perspective on the Packers. Obviously very well sourced. So really cool stuff. In lieu of predictions today, I wanted to ask you, because you've been around for a ton of these Bears-Packers games.
Yeah.
What is your favorite part of the rivalry? And is there a story, a game, a moment that stands out the most to you in your experience with it?
Well, the one that stands out the most is right after Walter Payton died and Brian Robinson blocked Packers field goal attempt for the Bears to win. And it was such an emotional week. and having the service for Walter Payton at Soldier Field, and then for them to win it the way they did, that's the one that reminds me the most. Now, when I first started in my career, it was a game that I'm not sure you even know about, Charles Martin and Jim McMahon. Charles Martin literally picked up Jim McMahon and threw him down on his head.
Well, we talked to Jim McMahon about that when we had him on the show about a year ago, and he literally brought that up. He credits that very openly as the moment that kind of started all of his concussion, CTE, all those issues.
Yeah. And you guys can check out that episode that we had with Jim McMahon on one of our past episodes as well. Check it out on YouTube and also on the ESPN Chicago app. But yeah, those definitely. And I think the most recent was just the dagger, was Aaron Rodgers, the I own you. That was just like it was such a helpless feeling watching that, because he was right. And he got the last say. Against Bears fans, he got the last say. That's what I remember the most.
Here's to hoping that 15 years down the line, Caleb Williams maybe gets that moment at Lambeau Field. We're so far away from it, but we can still have hope. If we can have one thing, we can have hope.
We can also have you guys check us out on YouTube, also on the ESPN Chicago app. Don't forget to follow us, like us. You can check us out on social media, on X, formerly known as Twitter, at TSAHS Pod. That's the Sportscaster and her son pod. Follow Jason at Jason Kinander. You can follow me at ESPN Peggy or at Peggy Kaczynski. Don't forget to check out Rob Demovsky as well. Thank you to Jack McGrath, our producer at ESPN Chicago, where you can find our audio version of the podcast, not just Apple Podcasts, but also the ESPN Chicago app. I will be back on the post-game show for ESPN Chicago and the Chicago Bears radio network, along with Yurko, a former Packer, another local guy growing up in Northwest Indiana, growing up a Bears fan, ended up playing for the Packers. So you can check out our post-game coverage, every Bears game, on the ESPN Chicago app on the Chicago Bears radio network. Jason, what else?
If you like our show, please like, rate, and subscribe. It helps us out, boosts the algorithm. We love doing this podcast. And, Mom, we'll be back pretty soon for more. I don't think that I have much else to say. I'll be here watching the game. Actually, I won't. Going to Austin this weekend to visit the girlfriend. My first time in the old college town since graduation. I have said about 1 million times, this is not going to be a weekend back in college. This is me as an adult visiting my girlfriend. However, I am very excited to be back in Austin and eat some really good food. The Michelin list for Austin came out today.
Ooh, I'll have to check it out. Yeah. All right, Jason, great job, buddy. Have a great weekend. Hopefully we have some positive things to talk about next week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Hey, hook 'em horns, too, all right?
Yeah, hook 'em.
Take care, everyone. So long.